I'm going to attempt to explain what I've been trying to say in these forums because something's getting mixed up here. Um, I'm going to walk through the lecture that you gave, Dr. Gutenson, may have been 2 times ago on soteriology, giving the examples from the Gospel of Luke. And this is kind of where I'm getting my wires crossed. So I'm going to try to build my argument and explain where I'm coming from. The first account you gave was the account of the man who had leprosy. And you were talking about how God is restoring this man to his community, and that being salvation. Um, the second story was the demon possessed man in a similar way being restored to community, another aspect of salvation. The third story was the woman who bleeds, that she is no longer unclean and can also be restored to her community. The Zacchaeus story being restored to the community, and then the widow, not only the son who was brought back to life, but the widow herself who was brought back to life. And I was totally tracking with you on this lecture, and it was making a lot of sense, but then I started thinking about salvation from that justification standpoint from Wesley's own model. Being a true son of his, when we are aware of our brokenness, our need for salvation, and we are willing to lay ourselves down to him. And in all of the stories that you referenced, I didn't see that element there. So let me try to explain what I'm saying. The man who had leprosy, was he on track, or at that point that he is restored in a physical realm, that his hands are healed, is he now saved in an eternal sense? I don't see that there. I don't see any justification there. I see almost more of the prevenient grace of God there. And perhaps when you're talking about the salvation in that sense, you're including those stages of prevenient grace, which I think from our literature, they would also include that in the story of salvation. But if justification doesn't happen, then salvation isn't realized. From my understanding, a person who has prevenient grace in their life, which is everyone, does not necessarily have the justifying grace, which is that moment when you take accountability for what you've done. You stand before God in a humble fashion and you accept his forgiveness. Moving on to the next story, the demon-possessed man, the woman who bleeds, Zacchaeus, the widow, all of these people are restored in a temporary place here on earth, but I don't see any evidence from the stories of an eternal salvation. And that's kind of where I was getting stuck. From my viewpoint, salvation begins with the justification phase. Now, you could argue that it begins in the prevenient grace phase because without prevenient grace, you could not make it to the justification phase. And I would concede that point. But without the justification phase, there is no salvation in the long run. And when I'm talking about salvation, that term in my head is eternal salvation. I know that's the very thing you're trying to break us of thinking through things only in the eternal. But the reason why I'm stuck on that is because when you start using the examples that you used, or someone else pointed out the Israelites being delivered from Egypt, that's not eternal salvation. And so I hesitate to label that in a soteriology realm or a salvation sense, because while it is good and while it does restore people, it is only in an earthly way. Those people who were freed from the desert still died, or freed from Egypt still died in the desert, and eventually they were led to a land that was only a shadow of the inheritance that we have in heaven. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I don't disagree with what you're saying about the work that Jesus does, and I would certainly want to make sure that you understand that I believe that while salvation begins in the justification stage, that it extends through the rest of our lives. As Wesley pointed out, we have that continual choice to exist in that justification place with God, and then step into that sanctification, almost becoming what we will one day be in heaven, kind of being perfected while we're here on earth, continuing on in heaven. But to put the focus on things that happened previously to justification and call that salvation, I think that's dangerous, because people can be led into believing that they are saved prior to owning up to their own brokenness. And that's what I was trying to communicate. I don't know if we're saying the same thing and it's being miscommunicated in words, or we're on different pages, but I have trouble bridging the gap and extending salvation language to things that do not walk through justifying grace. That's where I'm getting hung up. I think Wesley would probably say something similar. It seemed like he was very big on the convicting grace, the justifying grace, that process being pivotal and integral to salvation. So while it is not all that salvation is, without that step, salvation is not present. Does that make sense? I don't know how this could be responded to with just words. I don't know if anyone else is on the same page as me, or if I'm off on my own little island trying to understand this. But that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm getting stuck.